Thank you so much, Lance and Sherelle. And if your team could put my presentation up on the stage, I can get started. Thank you very much. Okay, as we mentioned, my keynote explores the question, is there life after caregiving? And I'm going to answer that question in a vulnerable way by telling my own story, starting with what I'm doing now. And my primary focus these days is health and care solutions for the underserved senior community. As Lance mentioned, I'm an author, journalist, songwriter, care advocate, and I perform the marketing and sales for a senior care facility in Mexico. And I spent nearly a quarter of my life as a caregiver, and we'll get into that a little bit farther into this. My agenda explores this question using my personal story through transparency and vulnerability. And I think by the end of this, I hope to answer this question for you. I'm sure we're all familiar with the phrase, it's darkest before the dawn. And this was definitely a reality for me somewhere along the way in my caregiving journey. I'd lost my job after 13 years at a company I thought I'd retire with. And it's just before my 60th birthday. Ageism hampered my search for another 3 years, which only complicated my finances. My loved one had become increasingly unmanageable. My full-time live-in caregiver wanted to quit. I was rapidly burning through my finances with living expenses and care expenses. And as I explored options, they really were not meeting my needs. They were inordinately expensive, but much more importantly, they were just entirely unsatisfactory. And I was at my wit's end, exhausted, depressed, disillusioned, and desperate. My outlook was, I'd care for my wife, then I'd care for my mother, then I will die alone, broke, and nobody to look after me. Is that dark enough for you? But this isn't my pity party, and I'm not alone in this. This is a weight that we all carry, and it's not just a weight, it's also an honor as well as a duty. But no matter how you approach it, caregiving is extremely challenging. It's absolutely exhausting. Wears our patience out. Our personal health is sacrificed. Our finances are depleted. Sometimes our loved ones can be thankless or even cruel. People around us innocently offer what feels more like judgment than genuine support. And for bonus points, some of us are sandwiched with kids in one direction and a loved one in the other. It feels like you've landed a second job without choice or compensation. Like what I described for myself, you may feel applies in your world as well, and you may feel like your prospects are quite dim. While the details may vary, I don't think my story is all that unusual. In fact, I would say that we have much more in common, all of us, than just being male and caregiver. It's almost as though it's a secret society in the sense that until somebody's been down this road, they really can't know what it's about. They can make an effort to be empathetic and compassionate, but this is a singular journey that is just not understood from the outside. And we're typically thrown into caregiving a bit unexpectedly. As such, most of us are overwhelmed by all the uncertainty and unknowns. I mean, this is a large space to understand everything from powers of attorney and healthcare directives and estate planning to medications and understanding the different stages that people go through and the way that we have to adapt our caregiving behaviors. There's just so much to understand. It is truly, as other people mentioned, it's overwhelming. But in addition to that, there's another more personal question that starts to surface in the background. How am I going to even survive this? And if I do, what will my life look like then? Is there life after caregiving? So let me set the stage for this story. I lived a somewhat charmed childhood in the late 50s, 60s, and 70s, a time where kids rode their Stingray bicycles here and there till dinner time. They dipped their toe in the entrepreneurship pool with summertime lemonade stands and paper routes and mowing the neighbor's lawn, and very charismatic leaders like John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King. I felt like it was a magical time. At the same time, I moved with my family every year. And you can only spend so much of your life being the new kid before you've just had your fill. And the beginning of high school, I refused to move. My family tried to dissuade me, knowing that I'm very stubborn, and offered me some very undesirable living alternatives. And I finally found my own, and living in a country home with a friend in Mendocino. Unfortunately, not long after I'd made that choice, my father had been murdered, and my family requested that I come back and be reunited with him in Hermosa Beach, California. Not long after that, they said, "We're moving." And they moved to the Bay Area, and I said, "Well, I'm not." And so I lived with my uncle for a little while, and then I obtained jobs as a short order cook and also working weekends in a commercial lumber yard, which paid well, but was a little dangerous. But that afforded me the opportunity to convince somebody to rent me a small apartment, and which I did through high school. And then at the end of high school, I moved to the Bay Area to be reunited with my family. At that time, my soon-to-be wife's mother introduced me to a fantastic structural engineering firm in San Francisco, where I took a job. And this was just as careers were beginning to appear in the workplace. Not so much in the workplace as much as tools where you would rent time on massive computers. And it wasn't something that was very appealing to most of the people in the office. So I ended up with the privilege of administering all of the computing on massive computers that filled warehouses or whole floors of buildings that we rented time from, like Cray supercomputers and others that you may have heard of. And there was absolutely fabulous opportunity. Simultaneously, I acquired my undergraduate and graduate degrees at night at Golden Gate University. And that was a springboard for a progressive advancement in my career as a technology and strategy executive in all sorts of industries and locations, both domestically and internationally. I'll talk about how I ended up where I am now in a little bit. I think it'll make itself apparent. But the real story begins with my second wife, Sana. And we had a comfortable life. It was predictable with few responsibilities other than each other and our jobs. We had fulfilling Silicon Valley jobs, but they referred to as dinks, dual income, no kids. And had lots of hobbies and free time as well as a very busy work life. There were a few hardships, but it was manageable. And mostly we were building momentum, and we were definitely on a roll. In fact, we had really big plans. We were planning on taking a sabbatical, which we had been researching and training and preparing for to ride our motorcycles around the world. From my perspective, life was good. And then it wasn't. Early symptoms began to appear. My wife was having trouble with some of her motorcycle skills and some everyday life skills and in her work. We were in denial, like I think everybody is, searching for other explanations, any explanation. And I'll call it a year of hope, but it was probably a year of denial, that we worked with all sorts of specialists, including the UCSF Memory and Aging Center and the Stanford Medical Center. But in the end, we got the diagnosis: early onset Alzheimer's disease. At 47, my wife was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. We had to surrender to this reality, and our world just split in two, before and after. Um, the world as we knew it crumbled right before our eyes. But I was in the game. I was committed. I was fully committed. But as sincere as that was, it was probably equally naive. I didn't know what I was committing to, and that I had increasing work demands that were competing with growing care needs. We had years of grief. Everybody approaches this differently. I'd say that my wife cried for a year. It was very, very hard on both of us. And through the ensuing years, there were escalating challenges and a lot of resistance to any kind of caregiving support from outside people as well as myself. Eventually brought in a 24/7 live-in caregiver. Even then, there were attempted escapes. I had to put deadbolts on the doors, and my wife would actually break the handles off of the doors trying to escape. She escaped out of cars and intersections when we were stopped at a stoplight. Melted cookware, police visits, paranoia, fears. She even told our live-in caregiver that she was going to murder me in my sleep. So we had to hide everything that felt like it could be used as a weapon and put deadbolts on the other bedrooms and all sleep separately. Everybody's dementia or Alzheimer's manifests differently, and everybody's caregiving journey is different, but this is how mine went. After almost 8 years, love and sheer will were not enough. A better solution was needed. And while this was going on, we had a morale crisis at work. After doubling in size, we made a huge acquisition. We bought another 125 stores. And shortly after that, the recession in 2007 hit, and we had to do the first layoffs in our 50-year history. People were pretty upset, and the morale was at an all-time low. I started and led a large charity initiative to try to redirect our attention. There's nothing that takes your eyes off of your own self-pity when you're helping others. And this was really a wonderful opportunity for not only for the company, but it turned out as it was a wonderful opportunity for me as well. Through this process, I discovered so many people had been going through all kinds of hardships that I never would have imagined. They were just quietly suffering. And I also found that those that had the least to give in terms of time and money were the ones that gave the most, which is an interesting paradox. But it was definitely leading to my awakening of my own privileged life up to that point. It was the beginning of an aha moment that would be a turning point in my life. So through all of this, a new capacity arose in me for generosity and kindness and humility, born from pain and loss. But the situation could not continue. The challenges were worsening. In-home care was no longer sustainable, and I was disappointed with all the options I was finding. I'd read many, many books. The most recent book I read was Where is Whitney Now? And it was a husband's accounting of the very similar journey to my own with his wife and Alzheimer's. And at the end, he said that he had found this incredible place in San Miguel de Allende. So my mother lived in San Miguel, and I asked her if she could connect me with the author, which she did. And after we spoke for a bit, he said, "This is absolutely the place for you and your wife. Come on down and I'll give you a tour myself." But unfortunately, he had a stroke. But I did get down there, and I spent a week. I spent time with the residents, with the staff. I got to know the facilities, the area, and I had so much guilt confronting the reality that I was not going to be able to fulfill my promise to care for my wife, myself in our home, that I was overwhelmed with how wonderful this place was, and that they would be able to actually do a better job than I had been doing. So I cried the first day I was there. Cielito Lindo provided 7 more years of extraordinary care for my wife. With that final phase of care in place and more years had passed, my expectations for myself were isolation and grief, as well as financial hardships. It was much less expensive in Mexico, but it was still equal to many families' entire budget for living expenses, out of pocket with no support. As the years went on, the last thing I expected was to meet somebody new, and it happened by chance. And initially, I was deeply conflicted with this, and my friends divided on both sides of the fence. Some said, "How could you?" And others said, "I'm so happy for you." But early on, my wife had once told me, "Honor me, but live on and be happy." So I embarked on this relationship, but I explained I have this very serious commitment that I'm going to follow through on for as long as it takes. And fortunately, she said, "I wouldn't want to be with you if you weren't that kind of person. So I get it, and let's do this together." In the end, Sana passed peacefully in her sleep, 15 years after we started to suspect that there was a problem. Today, I'm happily remarried, children and grandchildren, semi-retired after 47 years, reveling in my newfound purpose. Grief remains. When sometimes we talk about getting over grief, you don't get over it, you get through it. And it becomes part of the fabric of who you are. It just doesn't dominate your mind and your attention the same way, but it changes you for the rest of your life. And as such, my perspective on life is incredibly enhanced to this experience. Not that I would recommend it, but as a byproduct, I really grew. In fact, I would say that I'm transformed. The catalyst of the long goodbye with all those years with my wife, the charity leadership that I did for years and helping families find care solutions in Mexico, transformed my mindset to one of service, and both in my work and in my life. And all the years of research that I had done for my wife evolved and primed the pump for me to become a senior health and care advocate. And this whole caregiving journey unveiled a whole new breadth in me of generosity and empathy and kindness, greater compassion, endurance, and a capacity for love. It certainly wasn't the life I planned, but it ended up being a much more meaningful one. And today my mantra is patience, kindness, humility, and grace. You could say that my life has been shaped by loss, clarified by purpose, and now devoted to service. I wrote many songs, as was mentioned earlier, and this particular song is the story of my transformation. I just want to read you a few lines from the chorus here. Turning sorrow into something sweet, making gold from worn out grief. By loving deep and loving free, every tear that fell through me became a balm for someone's need. That's not just healing, that's alchemy. So back to the question, is there life after caregiving? And before I explore that further, I just want to take you on a little side story. I think it's easier sometimes to think about something when we're thinking about it in the third person and not ourselves. So I'm going to tell you a little story about my younger brother who lives a very counterculture life. He's tattooed every inch of his body. His name is named Lord Relentless Ha. He lives in South San Francisco and has been HIV positive for 30 years. Many years ago, I used to have him come and do work around my house as an opportunity for me to just give him money, really. And he showed up one day and he spoke to me, gritting his teeth, saying, "Hi, James." And I said, "What's that about?" And he explained that in his neighborhood at the start of the month, when the government checks come, there's a lot of drug activity that goes on. And somebody who had just lit up was now accosting an older woman across the street at a bus stop, and he went over to intercede, and the guy caught him off guard and broke his jaw. I said, okay, I'd put that as an 11 on the scale of 1 to 10. And he said, yeah. And then he pulled out a pair of tin snips out of his back pocket and said, my medications, I take so many medications, and sometimes it makes me throw up. And if I feel that coming on, I've got to snip the wires quickly so I don't suffocate. And I said, okay, you firmly cemented yourself in the 11 on a scale of 1 to 10. And he said, if a teenage girl gets a hangnail and it's the most painful experience she's ever had, that's a legitimate 10 for her. He said, for me, this is a 7. And I tell that story to highlight that caregiving rewires how we see life. While we're in the middle of it, it may be hard to see, but pain is relative. And this perspective is a hard-earned one, but it's also a gift. And through contrast, gratitude is revealed. We discover something new amongst ourselves, a greater appreciation for life, for living, for every day, for this moment. So the bottom line is, at least from my perspective, is yes, there is life after caregiving. But this is only my story, and only you can guess how your stories are going to play out. But we do get to choose how we are shaped by our circumstances. Victimhood or an opportunity for growth and rediscovery. I chose my context for those caregiving years and the ultimate loss of my wife, and I see it as a graduate degree in the human condition. And as a result, I'm a far better man. So my days, and I work more now than I ever did, but I don't even consider it work because it's so meaningful to me. I feel like I now have a greater purpose in my life than the other 5 decades that I worked. And I do a lot of work for and through Cielito Lindo with their website and all the writing I do and marketing and working with families. I spend a lot of time consulting on the phone and video calls, helping families work their way through their caregiving needs and possibly choosing us as a solution. As we've said, I've now written 60 songs, and I publish those through the Resilient Heart. I've also recently written a book and published that through Resilient Heart Press and public speaking. But at the heart of all this, it's just that I have the privilege of helping others, both directly and indirectly, as they go down this same road. Everything I've listed above supports my mission, which is to foster informed decision-making and drive positive change within the senior health and care industries. This is the Cielito Lindo website. It's very colorful and packed full of information. I've written hundreds of articles for caregivers about medical needs, about the healthcare industry, about new medical advances, and for friends and family on the periphery of caregiving to help them get greater perspective and understanding of what we're going through. I've written a weekly newsletter. It's very comprehensive every week for 7 years. I have a massive YouTube channel with over 70 playlists and 1,700 curated videos. And then there's the Resilient Heart for music. And I've written songs like The Things I Should Have Said, The Long Goodbye, The Empty Side of the Bed, The Things She Used to Do, and Every Day's a Blessing. This music is served up through YouTube as a video and 25 other streaming services like Spotify, YouTube Music, and Apple, and others. Then, as I had mentioned at the outset, I had recently published a book, It's the book I was looking for, and it's the way I felt about Alzheimer's and dementia as I had encountered it, which is there's no easy answer. It's not a simple topic, and there's no clear-cut answers. Even the diagnosis takes forever, and they're rarely absolutely clear. I used the Kubler-Ross stages of grief: denial, anger, acceptance, reconciliation, reconstruction, and bargaining, as a way to talk about the journey and the different phases that we go through with our loved one. And the second half of the book is a reference guide for a lot of different situations that we will encounter and how to handle those. So I don't want to do too much thank yous because everyone ahead of me has already said profuse thank yous. I'll just echo their remarks. And if you wish to access any of the information that I've presented, I've got links here, which I believe this presentation will be shared. And also the QR code in lavender is my caregiving contact information, and the pale blue is all of my digital marketing and other professional work like agentic AI work. That completes my presentation.
Great.